So today we're diving into something pretty significant. It's the rumored plot for Avengers Doomsday, and specifically how it seems to be positioning Doctor Doom. The material we're looking at details this just unprecedented level of destruction. He takes out the time variance authority, he dismantles the most powerful heroes. It really forces you to ask what's at the core of his character now.
Exactly. And that brings us to the central question, doesn't it? Based on these reported events, are we watching a traditional power-hungry conqueror who is just driven by pure ego? Or, and this is the interesting part, are we seeing a kind of necessary nihilistic figure of order, whose brutality is actually a pragmatic response to save a multiverse that is literally about to collapse?
Right. And my position is that the evidence, especially when you look at the way he does things, the personalized cruelty, it all points overwhelmingly toward a man seeking personal dominion, a dominion built on fear and trauma.
And I'm going to come at it from a slightly different angle. I mean, nobody can argue with the brutality, that's obvious. But I believe the context demands we read it differently. Doom's actions, they feel less like an indulgence of ego and more like a series of calculated, almost surgical moves. He's trying to impose an essential, if, draconian, order on a system that has already proven itself to be fundamentally broken.
Okay, so let's dig into that. Because the line between calculated strategy and calculated cruelty is really where this whole debate lives. My central claim is that Doom's primary motivation here is to build fear. It's to shatter the will of anyone who would oppose him and establish an authority that's just seen as inevitable. If he were just a pragmatist, his methods would be efficient, quick. Instead, they're all about psychological impact. I mean, take his very first move, the massacre at the TVA. That's not a strategic move against a rival army. That is the complete removal of the only body that regulates the multiverse. The material says this signals he has zero interest in negotiating or collaborating. He's basically declaring war on the very concept of external control. It's just a raw exercise in authority, confirming his belief that, and I quote, "no one controls reality except him." And then we see it again with the defeats of the legacy heroes, Deadpool, Wolverine, the Spider-Man. They aren't just victories. They're described as acts of fear-building. The method is the message. And nothing makes that clearer than what's called his cruelest moment, killing Thor right in front of Loki. It's a deliberate mirror of Loki's own death. I mean, that's not tactical. That is weaponizing personal trauma. It's a punishment designed to emotionally cripple any future resistance. In the final state of battle world, a world held together by obedience, it just confirms the whole point was compliance, not peace.
Okay, I absolutely acknowledge the brutal psychological weight of everything you just said, but I think if we focus only on the trauma, we risk missing the larger conceptual necessity that's driving all of this. My claim is that Doom is acting like a brutal pragmatist who sees the multiverse as having a terminal illness. His actions aren't just extreme, they're presented as the absolute final, desperate attempt to make sure that any kind of existence can survive. You have to look at the timeline. Doom only makes his move after the entire system has failed. The TVA is gone, the safety nets are destroyed, and the multiverse is exposed. It's unstable because of, too many timelines, too many variants. He is reacting to the fact that the old way of doing things, the old conceptual framework, simply can't hold reality together anymore. The old system failed, and we can't just dismiss the rumored evidence of his worthiness.
I mean, the possibility that he can wield Mjolnir, that's incredibly important. It supports the idea that his initial intention is to save the multiverse and bring order. It's the ultimate proof of a heroic self-view, no matter how corrupted it becomes. The heroes themselves eventually realize he wasn't just trying to conquer a single universe, he was stress testing the whole system until he realized it was beyond repair. And that realization is what forces him to merge what's left into Battleworld. His goal, by his own monstrous logic, is to ensure the universe can never collapse. It's a grand, if horrific, act of preservation.
But that brings up a fascinating point about his methods. If we assume Doom is acting rationally to save a dying universe, how do you justify the sheer personalized violence, the theatrics? Why not just eliminate Thor instantly? without that whole emotional stage play for Loki.
That's a fair challenge. And it brings us right back to the TVA. You see the TVA attack as him removing the competition. I see it as necessary demolition. The TVA, for all its power, had become the ultimate symbol of the multiversal disease. Kang created it, Loki tried to reform it, and it still resulted in the rampant incursions that Doom is now facing. So Doom doesn't need to take over its machinery, he needs to prove its entire conceptual foundation is fatally flawed. He allows the collapse to happen because he needs that instability to justify the final merge. It's a ruthless calculation. You have to destroy the failed system before you can create a new one.
I see why you'd think that, but I still frame that TVA action as being entirely rooted in ego. The act of total, instantaneous removal is a huge statement about who is in charge. A true pragmatist might capture the existing mechanism and repurpose it. Doom doesn't stabilize, he obliterates. He declares his authority over all history, all timelines, all at once. It's a grand theatrical purge. It's meant to instill a paralyzing fear, which, brings us right back to the psychological warfare.
Okay, let's talk about the psychological warfare then. I just don't buy that the elimination of someone like the Sentry, who is killed, quickly, almost dismissively, is purely for fear building. Let me tell you why. Sentry represents raw, limitless physical power. So when Doom defeats him with that kind of ease, it's sending a very clear, very clinical message. Brute strength is irrelevant now. It's useless against the scale of this crisis and against Doom's methods. It's a necessary move to shift the whole conflict from a physical fight to a conceptual one. He's proving the old rules of heroism just don't apply anymore.
I'm not convinced they're clinical at all. They are intensely personal. When Doom forces someone like Wanda or Jean Grey into situations that cause an emotional collapse, making them choose who lives and who dies, or forcing these tragic power transfers, that is so far beyond strategic elimination. Strategic elimination is removing a threat efficiently. What Doom is doing is actively weaponizing their grief, their morality, against them. He forces them to live with these impossible choices, so even if they survive, they're emotionally broken. He wants to rule their minds, not just their territory. And the quickest way to do that is to exploit their trauma. That theatrical cruelty, the Loki mirror, the choices he forces on Wanda, that's the signature of a conqueror who wants his authority to live inside his subjects' heads, driving them to obedience through pure terror.
And I'd concede the trauma is a devastating part of it, but it's trauma with a strategic end: fragmentation. To achieve his merge, Doom needs there to be no cohesive, morally unified force left to stop him. And if the only way to achieve that fragmentation is through psychological warfare, then to save the multiverse, that's a price he's willing to pay. He forces the power transfers, yes, but that ensures those powers can't be used against his final act of preservation. His cruelty is the tool he uses to ensure no resistance is left to interrupt the salvation of all existence.
Well, that defense brings us to what I think is the biggest contradiction in this whole thing, the issue of worthiness. We've heard these rumors he can lift Mjolnir, which implies some kind of heroic intent, right? Some worthiness. But how can Doom possibly be seen as a figure of necessary order when his final creation, Battleworld, is defined by a tyrannical rule where survival depends on obedience? That's the key phrase. The fact that he could, for a moment, lift Mjolnir, it becomes irrelevant if the end result is absolute tyrannical control. The heroes lose because Doom rewrites the board, leaving this broken reality held together only by his will. A savior creates a self-sustaining system. A conqueror creates a regime of forced submission. The outcome defines the motive, and the outcome is pure dominance.
That's a compelling argument, but I'd frame that paradox as the core tragedy of the story, not as a dismissal of his initial intent. Have you considered that Doom's journey is one of him realizing the sheer impossibility of pure heroism when faced with a fundamentally diseased reality? Mjolnir recognizing him proves his initial goal was genuine: salvation. But the horror of the story is that Doom, and maybe the universe itself, realizes that salvation requires tyranny. The Hammer might recognize the intent to save everything, even if the only viable method is monstrous. The story even suggests that some of the heroes start to understand his logic. That implies the moral dilemma is conceptual. Maybe, when faced with total annihilation, order can only be achieved through forced submission. He's choosing a brutal, shackled existence over non-existence, and maybe Mjolnir recognizes that agonizing choice.
But just look at Battleworld itself. It's not just stabilized, it's a forced merge. And we've seen this before. This kind of reality is always a temporary fix that requires this massive personal effort to maintain. If Doom's ultimate goal was stability, why build a reality that's based on the constant psychological effort of maintaining obedience? It suggests the stability is totally conditional on his ability to perpetuate fear, which is inherently unstable. A true savior would create a cosmos with built-in mechanisms for peace. He creates a reflection of his own ego, a perfect dictatorship. That doesn't anchor the universe, it just anchors Doom's power.
I think that is the final tragedy, though, and it underscores the necessity. Doom realizes that coexistence failed. If he allows free will and autonomy on Battleworld, the system will just repeat the same catastrophic mistakes that led to the collapse in the first place. So the only way to ensure the universe never collapses is to eliminate the source of the problem: unchecked freedom. This draconian control, this obedience. It's presented as the only viable anchor left for reality after all the softer solutions have failed. The hero's downfall is linked to their hesitation, that doubt, precisely because they couldn't accept the terrible truth. The system was too broken for anything less. Doom may be a conqueror, but he's a conqueror who believes and whose actions are framed to suggest that the fate of all existence requires him to be one.
Indeed. So for me, the defining actions of Dr. Doom, the calculated trauma, the systematic elimination of symbols like the TVA and the heroes, and the resulting regime of obedience, it all overwhelmingly frames him as a villain who succeeds by breaking the spirit of resistance. His goal is total personal dominance, just wrapped in a convenient justification of saving the world. He chooses tyranny over chaos, but it is still tyranny.
And I still maintain that while the means are horrifying, the overriding context of an actively collapsing multiverse suggests Doom is operating from a belief that he is the only one who can ensure existence itself survives. His identity shifts from a potential savior worthy of Mjolnir to a necessary destroyer, driven by this cold, conceptual clarity that the system has irreversibly failed. He forces a terrible peace on the universe because he saw no other alternative to total annihilation.
The material definitely uses these brutal actions to present a character whose motive is fiercely debatable. It forces you to grapple with whether extreme destruction and psychological torment can ever really be justified in the name of a self-appointed forced order.
Exactly. We're left with two credible, robust interpretations of a figure who operates completely outside the normal bounds of good and evil. Whether his heart is altruistic or purely selfish, his actions challenge every moral boundary, and that provides rich ground for discussion. There is clearly much more to explore here as we try to get inside the mind of Victor Von Doom.